Footsteps echoed on the pavement, steady and calm, until the blare of a police siren shattered the morning peace. A power-hungry patrolman just slapped handcuffs on a black man in a bespoke suit for simply walking down the street. He doesn't know his victim is the city's newly elected mayor. Morning traffic hummed along Oakwood Avenue as Elias Kane adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy suit. At 52, Elias had just won the most contentious mayoral election in the city's history, running on a platform of sweeping institutional reform and police accountability. After weeks of grueling schedule demands, endless motorcades, and suffocating security details, he had made a rare, impulsive decision this morning. I was going to walk to work. City Hall was only a short distance from his downtown townhouse. The autumn air was crisp, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue, and Elias wanted a few moments of absolute solitude to clear his head before a brutal budget committee meeting. He had sent his driver and his chief of staff, Grant Ellison, ahead with his leather briefcase, which contained his briefing binders, his cell phone, and crucially, his wallet. Elias didn't think twice about it. He just wanted to feel the pavement beneath his feet and blend in with the citizens he had been elected to serve. Nearby, Officer Rex Caldwell sat idling in his black and white patrol cruiser, drumming his fingers against the steering wheel. Caldwell was a young officer, built like a linebacker, and carried a reputation within the department for being unnecessarily aggressive. He had a chip on his shoulder, the size of a city block, and a disciplinary file that had been conveniently swept under the rug by his previous commanding officers. Caldwell viewed the city not as a community to protect, but as a territory to dominate. He thrived on the power his badge afforded him, often targeting individuals he deemed out of place in the more affluent districts of the downtown area. As Caldwell slowly rolled past the upscale boutiques and artisanal coffee shops lining Oakwood Avenue, his eyes locked onto a figure walking purposefully toward the municipal district. It was a tall black man wearing an impeccably tailored, double-breasted navy suit that cost more than Caldwell made in a month. Caldwell narrowed his eyes. In his twisted worldview, the sight didn't compute. To him, the man looked too confident, too comfortable in a neighborhood that Caldwell subconsciously policed with a heavy racial bias. Caldwell's mind instantly began composing a narrative. Suspicious individual checking out high-end storefronts, probably a con artist or someone who just lifted a very expensive outfit. Without a second thought, Caldwell hit the lights. The flashing red and blues reflected off the glass facades of the buildings. He accelerated aggressively, pulling the cruiser onto the curb and cutting off the sidewalk directly in front of Elias. Elias stopped, his brow furrowing in mild confusion. He took a step back as the cruiser's door swung open violently. "Hold it right there. Don't move another inch," Caldwell barked, his hand resting menacingly on his utility belt as he stepped out of the vehicle. Elias stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed but commanding. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded respect in every boardroom and council chamber he entered. "I'll ask the questions here," Caldwell snapped, closing the distance between them. He looked Elias up and down, a sneer curling his lip. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "I'm walking to work," Elias replied calmly, keeping his hands visible and relaxed at his sides. He noted the officer's name tag, Caldwell. He also noted the aggressive stance, the hand hovering near the taser, the immediate escalation of a situation that required absolutely none. "Walking to work," Caldwell repeated mockingly. "Sure you are. In a suit like that, where did you get it? Did you borrow it, or did it fall off the back of a truck?" Elias's jaw tightened infinitesimally. He had spent his entire life navigating this exact brand of thinly veiled racism, but experiencing it now as the highest-ranking elected official in the city ignited a cold, quiet fury within him. He realized in an instant that this was exactly what his constituents had been protesting. This was the rot he had promised to cut out of the department. "I bought it," Elias said, his tone perfectly even, refusing to rise to the bait. "At a store. Now, if you don't mind, I have a very important meeting at City Hall, and I am on a tight schedule." Caldwell let out a harsh laugh. "City Hall? What? Are you late for your shift stripping the floors? Listen to me very carefully. You fit the description of a suspect we've had burglarizing offices in this district, so you're going to stand exactly where you are, keep your mouth shut, and hand over your ID." Elias sighed softly, patting the pockets of his trousers out of habit, though he already knew the answer. I don't have my ID on me. My wallet is in my briefcase, which my staff took ahead of me to my office. Caldwell's eyes lit up with predatory triumph. No ID. What a shock. Let me guess, you forgot your name too? My name is Elias Kane, he said clearly, locking eyes with the officer. He waited for the name to register. It had been plastered on billboards, lawn signs, and television screens for months. But Caldwell, drowning in his own arrogance and prejudice, didn't make the connection. To him, Elias Kane was just another name, and the man standing in front of him was just another target who dared to talk back. Right, Elias, Caldwell sneered, pulling his handcuffs from his belt with a sharp metallic clack. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You're being detained. Officer Caldwell, Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a warning that anyone else would have heeded immediately. I strongly advise you to think about what you are doing. If you make a quick radio call to your dispatcher or simply look at my face and remember who won the election recently, you will save yourself a career-ending mistake. Caldwell's face flushed with anger. The sheer audacity of this man, this suspect, giving him orders was more than his fragile ego could handle. I said turn around, Caldwell roared, lunging forward. He grabbed Elias's shoulder roughly, spinning him around and slamming him chest first against the hood of the patrol cruiser. The metal was cold against Elias's cheek. He felt the rough, bruising grip of Caldwell's hands as his arms were wrenched behind his back. Elias didn't resist. He went completely limp, offering zero physical opposition. He knew the law perfectly. He knew that the moment he pushed back, Caldwell would have the legal cover to escalate to violence. Elias's mind was razor sharp, cataloging every second, every word, every violation of protocol, illegal stop, unlawful detention, excessive force. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Elias's wrists. Caldwell clicked them shut, ratcheting them unnecessarily tight. You people always have a story, Caldwell hissed into Elias's ear as he patted him down aggressively, his hands roughly checking the tailored pockets of the suit. Always trying to act like you run the place. Save myself a mistake? I'm the law out here, buddy. You're just a perp with no ID and a bad attitude. You are a disgrace to that badge, Elias replied, his voice muffled against the hood of the car, yet remarkably steady. And you are currently kidnapping the mayor of this city. Caldwell froze for a fraction of a second, then burst into a loud, mocking guffaw. He grabbed Elias by the bicep and yanked him upright. The mayor! Caldwell laughed, practically dragging Elias toward the back door of the cruiser. That's a new one. Usually you guys claim to be undercover feds or sovereign citizens. But the mayor? Wow. I should call the psychiatric ward instead of the precinct. Caldwell shoved Elias's head down and pushed him into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the cruiser. Elias adjusted himself as best he could, his shoulders aching from the unnatural angle of his cuffed hands. He looked up through the metal mesh partition as Caldwell slammed the door shut, trapping him in the suffocating, stale air of the police vehicle. Caldwell climbed into the driver's seat, grinning from ear to ear. He genuinely believed he had made a righteous bust. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. I have one male suspect in custody. Refusal to identify, matching the description of our downtown burglar, transporting him to the central holding facility. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Copy 4 Bravo. Do you have a name for the suspect? He claims his name is Elias Kane, Caldwell said, unable to keep the smirk out of his voice. Also claims to be the mayor. Might want to have a psych eval waiting. There was a brief pause on the radio. Copy that, 4 Bravo. Proceed to Central. Caldwell threw the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, the siren giving a brief, aggressive yelp to clear the intersection. In the rearview mirror, he made eye contact with Elias. So, Mr. Mayor, Caldwell taunted as they drove down the bustling streets. What's on the agenda today? Going to pass a law against getting arrested for stealing suits? My agenda, Elias said quietly, his eyes dark and unblinking in the mirror, was to finalize the city's new budget, specifically the allocation of funds for the police department. But I believe I'll be adding an emergency review of patrol protocols and officer conduct to the top of my list. Keep dreaming, pal, Caldwell scoffed, taking a corner too fast, intentionally throwing Elias off balance in the back seat. By the time I'm done processing you, you'll be sitting in a cell waiting for a public defender who doesn't care about your delusions of grandeur. You think you can walk through my streets looking like you own them. I'm putting you exactly where you belong." Elias remained silent for the rest of the ride. He didn't need to say another word. He just watched the city roll by through the grated window. He watched the people on the sidewalks, the people who had trusted him to fix a broken system. For years, he had heard the testimonies of young men who had been harassed, belittled, and physically assaulted by officers just like Caldwell. He had read the reports. He had promised to change it. But feeling the tight bite of the metal on his wrists, feeling the utter helplessness of being locked in a cage by a man holding a gun and a badge, crystallized his mission in a way no briefing document ever could. As the cruiser approached the rear entrance of the Central Police Precinct, a massive brutalist concrete structure located directly adjacent to City Hall, Caldwell hit the horn to get the security gate to open. "End of the line, Your Honor," Caldwell mocked, pulling into the secured sally port. He parked the car, killed the engine, and stepped out. Inside the precinct, Chief of Police Victor Langley was currently standing by the front desk, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee and looking at his watch. Langley was a longtime veteran of the force, a tough, pragmatic man who had spent recent days sweating bullets over the new mayor's proposed police reforms. Langley had a meeting scheduled with Mayor Kane shortly to beg for leniency on the department's overtime budget. Langley's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a frantic text from Grant Ellison, the mayor's chief of staff. "Chief Langley, the mayor decided to walk to work. He hasn't arrived. He doesn't have his phone or ID. Please tell me your officers haven't seen anything unusual on Oakwood." Langley felt a sudden icy knot form in his stomach. He looked up just as the heavy metal doors of the sally port buzzed open and Officer Rex Caldwell marched through, aggressively gripping the arm of a tall black man in a severely wrinkled bespoke navy suit, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. Caldwell was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Elias Kane looked directly across the booking room and locked eyes with the chief of police. The blood drained completely from Chief Langley's face. The coffee cup slipped from his trembling hand, shattering on the linoleum floor, splashing dark liquid across the polished tiles. The loud crash echoed through the suddenly dead-silent precinct. Porcelain shards scattered across the linoleum, a sharp, dissonant sound that caused every desk sergeant, detective, and patrol officer in the massive room to freeze. Chief Victor Langley ignored the scalding coffee soaking into his tailored trousers. His wide, terrified eyes were locked onto the man standing beside Officer Rex Caldwell. Caldwell, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of the situation, puffed out his chest. He hauled Elias forward by the bicep, misinterpreting the chief's stunned silence as awe at his proactive policing. "Caught him prowling around Oakwood Avenue, Chief," Caldwell announced, his voice booming proudly across the dead-quiet booking floor. "Refused to provide identification, highly combative attitude. Fits the profile of the commercial burglary ring we've been tracking. I'm bringing him in for processing and a prolonged hold." Silence hung in the room, heavy and suffocating. No one moved. The desk sergeant, a longtime veteran named Harlan, slowly lowered his radio, his face draining of color as he recognized the man in the handcuffs. "Caldwell," Chief Langley choked out, his voice barely a raspy whisper. He took a stumbling step forward, his hands trembling. What? What have you done?" "Just doing my job, sir," Caldwell replied, a smug grin plastered across his face. He gave Elias another completely unnecessary shove toward the booking desk. "This guy actually tried to tell me he was the mayor. Can you believe the nerve? They'll say anything to avoid a cell." "Take them off," Langley commanded, the whisper suddenly erupting into a deafening roar that rattled the bulletproof glass of the holding cells. "Take the handcuffs off him right now." Caldwell blinked, genuinely startled. His grin faltered. "Chief, with all due respect, this suspect is undocumented and non-compliant. Standard operating procedure dictates." "I don't care about your procedure, you monumental idiot." Langley sprinted across the remaining distance, shoving Caldwell aside with such force that the younger officer slammed into the edge of the booking counter. Langley didn't wait for Caldwell to find his keys. He frantically dug into his own duty belt, his hands shaking violently as he pulled out his universal cuff key. "Mr. Mayor," Langley stammered, his voice cracking with sheer panic as he stepped behind Elias. "Sir, I I cannot express. I am so profoundly sorry." The metallic click of the handcuffs unlocking echoed loudly. Elias Kane brought his arms forward slowly. He didn't rub his wrists. He didn't stretch. He simply turned around, his posture immaculate despite the wrinkled suit, his expression a mask of cold, unyielding authority. Caldwell stood frozen against the counter. The words, "Mr. Mayor," finally penetrated his thick skull, ricocheting around his brain as the pieces horrifyingly clicked into place. The bespoke suit, the calmness, the name Elias Kane, the election signs he had driven past for months. All the blood drained from Caldwell's face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. His stomach violently plummeted. The absolute, unmitigated arrogance that had fueled his entire career evaporated in a single heartbeat, replaced by a cold, suffocating terror. "Chief Langley," Elias said, his deep baritone cutting through the silence like a scalpel. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer gravity of his tone commanded the absolute attention of every single soul in the building. "I appreciate your assistance. However, an apology will not suffice." "Sir, this is a horrific misunderstanding," Langley pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Officer Caldwell is a junior patrolman. He made a catastrophic error in judgment. I will have him suspended immediately, pending a full review." "It was not an error in judgment, Chief," Elias corrected softly, locking his dark eyes onto Langley. "An error in judgment is misreading a street sign. What Officer Caldwell executed today was an unlawful detainment, an illegal search, and an egregious abuse of power fueled by racial profiling. He didn't stop me because I looked like a burglar. He stopped me because I am a black man in a wealthy neighborhood, and he felt entitled to humiliate me." Elias slowly turned his gaze to Caldwell. The young officer visibly shrank, his broad shoulders collapsing under the crushing weight of his own colossal mistake. "You were informed of my identity, Officer Caldwell," Elias said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I offered you the opportunity to verify it. You chose instead to mock me, physically assault me, and kidnap me under the color of law. You told me you were the law on these streets. You told me I was exactly where I belonged." Caldwell's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. I didn't know," he squeaked, his voice cracking pitifully. "Sir, I swear, if I had known you were the mayor—" "That is exactly the problem," Elias interrupted, his voice finally rising, echoing off the concrete walls. "If you had known I was the mayor, you would have treated me with respect. But because you thought I was just a citizen, you treated me like an animal. How many other men have you put in handcuffs just because you didn't like the look of them? How many lives have you ruined because they didn't have the political power to fight back?" Elias turned back to the chief, his jaw set. "Chief Langley, our budget meeting is canceled. Instead, we are having an emergency disciplinary hearing right here, right now. I want the head of internal affairs down here immediately. I want the district attorney notified of an unlawful arrest. And I want this man stripped of his badge and his firearm before I take another breath in this building." "Yes, Mr. Mayor," Langley said instantly, not hesitating for a fraction of a second. He turned to Caldwell, his eyes blazing with fury. "Caldwell, badge and gun on the desk. Now!" "Chief, please!" Caldwell begged, tears welling in his eyes as the reality of his ruined life crashed down upon him. "My pension, my career, I have a family." "You should have thought about them before you decided to play tyrant," Langley spat. "Disarm yourself, or I will have the desk sergeant do it for you." With trembling hands, Caldwell unclipped his duty weapon and placed it on the counter. He unpinned the silver shield from his chest, his fingers lingering on the metal, before setting it down next to the gun. In a matter of moments, he had gone from an untouchable predator to a disgraced, unemployed civilian facing severe criminal charges. Mr. Mayor, Grant Ellison, Elias's chief of staff, burst through the front double doors of the precinct, panting heavily, followed closely by a frantic security detail. Ellison took one look at Elias rubbing his wrists and then at the disarmed Caldwell and stopped dead in his tracks. "Elias, what happened?" "I was just getting a first-hand look at the daily operations of our patrol division, Grant," Elias said coldly. "And I have decided that sweeping reforms are no longer a campaign promise. They are today's immediate executive order." The fallout was biblical. Elias Kane did not let the incident get swept under the rug as so many police misconduct cases had been in the past. He refused to accept the quiet resignation of Officer Rex Caldwell. Instead, Elias weaponized the absolute nightmare of his morning to enact the most aggressive, systematic purge of police corruption the city had ever seen. That same day, Elias held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. He stood before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing, still wearing the wrinkled navy suit, his wrists visibly bruised from the over-tightened metal. He detailed exactly what had happened, word for word. He exposed Caldwell's arrogance, his mockery, and his blatant violation of civil rights. The footage from Caldwell's own dashboard and body cameras, which Elias had immediately ordered secured by the district attorney, was released to the public later that day. The city erupted. The undeniable visual evidence of the mayor himself being brutalized, mocked, and illegally arrested by a smirking, arrogant cop destroyed any defensive narrative the police union tried to mount. Caldwell became the national face of institutional racism and police overreach. His name was plastered across every major news network, not as a hero of the law, but as a cowardly bully who had finally picked on the wrong target. But Elias knew that firing Caldwell wasn't enough. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice. If Caldwell had done this to the mayor, he had undoubtedly done it to dozens of vulnerable citizens who had no voice. Elias appointed an independent civilian oversight committee armed with unprecedented subpoena power to audit the entire precinct. They started with Rex Caldwell's sealed internal affairs files. What they found was horrific, but completely unsurprising. Over his years on the force, Caldwell had accumulated numerous excessive force complaints, multiple allegations of racial profiling, and numerous reports of unlawful detention. Every single one had been dismissed, minimized, or buried by his commanding officers. Caldwell hadn't been a bad apple. He was the product of a poison tree. The hard karma hit Caldwell like a runaway freight train. The district attorney, feeling the immense political pressure and armed with undeniable video evidence, indicted Caldwell on multiple felony charges, false imprisonment, official misconduct, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Caldwell's trial was a swift, humiliating spectacle. The defense tried to argue that Caldwell made an honest mistake, a simple procedural error in a high-stress environment. But the prosecution simply played the body cam footage of Caldwell laughing, taunting, and telling the mayor, "I'm putting you exactly where you belong." When the verdict was read, Caldwell stood trembling at the defense table, guilty on all counts. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had zero tolerance for dirty cops, did not grant leniency. She sentenced Rex Caldwell to 4 years in a federal penitentiary. As the bailiff approached to put Caldwell in handcuffs, the disgraced cop looked back at the gallery. Sitting in the front row, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a stern, unreadable expression, was Mayor Elias Kane. The irony was suffocating. The very handcuffs Caldwell had aggressively snapped onto Elias's wrists were now being placed onto his own. He was being led away, stripped of his power, his freedom, and his dignity. Chief Langley didn't survive the purge either. While he hadn't arrested the mayor, his complicity in burying Caldwell's past complaints made his position untenable. He was forced into early retirement, his reputation permanently tarnished, replaced by a progressive commissioner brought in from out of state to completely rebuild the department's culture. Over the following years, Elias Kane transformed the city. He implemented strict community policing protocols, mandated severe penalties for officers who failed to activate their body cameras, and established a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. Funding that was previously allocated for militarized police equipment was aggressively redirected into community mental health response teams and after-school programs in marginalized neighborhoods. The city's crime rate didn't skyrocket as the union had fear-mongered. Instead, community trust in the department slowly began to heal. Citizens actually began cooperating with detectives, knowing the officers were there to protect them, not to prey on them. Years later, Rex Caldwell was released from prison. He was a convicted felon, unemployable in law enforcement or private security. His pension had been completely revoked due to his felony conviction related to his official duties. His wife had left him during his incarceration, unable to bear the public shame and financial ruin. Caldwell found himself living in a cramped, dingy studio apartment on the far outskirts of the city, a neighborhood he used to aggressively patrol and harass. To pay his rent, he took a minimum wage job working the night shift at a commercial laundry facility, spending long hours sorting and washing uniforms for the city's sanitation department. One humid evening, as Caldwell was hauling a heavy canvas cart of soiled coveralls across the damp concrete floor, he glanced up at the small, static-filled television mounted in the corner of the break room. The evening news was on. The anchor was reporting live from a massive ribbon-cutting ceremony downtown. Standing at the podium, looking distinguished and powerful, was Governor Elias Kane, celebrating his recent landslide victory in the state election. The crowd was cheering wildly, celebrating a man who had actually kept his promises to clean up the streets, starting with the police department. Caldwell stood there sweating through his cheap-stained t-shirt, his hands calloused and blistered. He watched the man he had once mocked, the man he had thrown against the hood of a car just because he felt like it, accepting the highest office in the state. He looked down at his own hands, remembering the satisfying click of the handcuffs he used to wield like a weapon. He had truly believed he owned the city. He had believed he was untouchable. Caldwell turned away from the television, grabbing the handles of his laundry cart. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he pushed the heavy load back into the sweltering heat of the washroom, facing the brutal, inescapable reality that he had indeed been put exactly where he belonged. Wow, what an incredible story of instant karma and justice. The arrogance of power was completely shattered when Officer Caldwell picked the wrong target, proving that nobody is above the law. Mayor Kane's courage transformed a humiliating arrest into sweeping real-life changes for his city. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of power, prejudice, and ultimate accountability, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more amazing true-to-life storytelling. See you next time. Hi, my name is Board Justice, the owner and manager of Board Justice. After watching the video, arrogant cop stops black man walking to City Hall. He learns the hard way. He just stopped the mayor. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? For me, the strongest feeling was relief that accountability finally caught up with someone who abused their authority. What stood out most wasn't the surprise reveal, but the reminder that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter who they are or how they look. Respect should never depend on someone's title or position. I'm curious what stayed with you the most. Was it the stop itself, the moment the officer realized who he had detained, or the changes that followed afterward? And do you think experiences like this can encourage better leadership and stronger community trust over time? One lesson I took from this story is that taking a moment to listen, stay professional, and avoid making assumptions can completely change the outcome of an interaction. Those small choices matter in everyday life, whether we're at work or simply meeting someone new. If this story gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that explore accountability, fairness, and justice, feel free to like the video or subscribe if you think it's worth your time.